Just to say hello to Tayside CND. I'm Arthur West and I'm the chair of Scottish CND. John and I are sorry we can't actually be at your meeting tonight because it clashes with the Scottish CND executive, but nevertheless we're pleased to hear obviously the meeting's taking place, and I mean thanks to Alan Cowan in particular, who I know does a lot of work in keeping CND going from an organisational point of view up in Tayside. So as part of the package that we've organised for you, there's going to be a presentation by John Ainslie, our coordinator, a very hard-working coordinator, and you'll see that as part of this package. All I wanted to say is, as chair of Scottish CND at this very important time, it goes without saying that we're very active, and at the present time we're organising a series of road shows across various areas in the country, and there will be more information coming out about that. But the idea of the road shows is that we have as part of them a Scrap Trident declaration, which is giving people an opportunity to indicate that they're very much for scrapping Trident, but we're also hoping to use that declaration to get a number of elected members and other public figures from localities to sign it. So we'll obviously be liaising with yourselves in relation to that. I think the importance of keeping up the fight about nuclear weapons has probably been emphasised in a number of ways, but one of the things that strikes me is that the humanitarian arguments are now very much coming to the fore, and that if there is any sort of nuclear weapons exchange in the world today, I mean the consequences for the whole planet will be absolutely drastic, and we're indebted to a number of our members and supporters, and also organisations like the Red Cross for emphasising the humanitarian aspect. I don't want to say any more other than to say that the information that we have, and probably the information that you have yourselves, is that it's looking likely that there could be a vote in Parliament, in the Westminster Parliament, in March or April in relation to replacing Trident. And while things don't look very optimistic in terms of that vote, we have to obviously continue campaigning in the run-up to the vote, and keeping the issue of the scandalous waste of money and the immorality of going ahead with Trident replacement would represent. All I would say is that it's good that there's still a bit of there's quite a bit of local activity I know in Tayside, and that's being replicated throughout various areas of the country, and it's very, very important that we all continue to work and make the arguments for scrapping Trident. And just to finish off by saying that in terms of political parties, we continue to work with all the political parties. I mean, at the present time there's a SNP trade union group, CND trade union and CND group, but a CND group which is very much being supported by a number of members, and will argue the case for CND within the SNP. There's also looking now, we'll have a CND group within the Green Party, and we obviously keep contact with the Liberal Democrats. And in terms of the Labour Party, though there was some disappointment that they didn't, to say the least, that they didn't debate the issue of Trident at their recent conference, nevertheless we have welcomed Jeremy Corbyn as a leader, and the fact that he has certainly managed on a number of occasions to get the issue of Trident in the news and in the media in recent times. And Jeremy's obviously a long-standing member and supporter of CND, so we welcome his leadership of the Labour Party. But as I say, we continue to work with all political parties, and obviously acknowledge that there are people, our supporters and members in all political parties, working to argue the case for CND and argue the case for scrapping Trident. The AGM is in November the 7th, and it's in Edinburgh. People will see details on the website, but members and supporters and affiliated organisations should have information about it. So we would hope that as many CND members and supporters can get to the AGM, and it is November the 7th in Edinburgh. It would be nice to see you there.
What I'd like to do is go through a short PowerPoint presentation that basically tries to tackle some of the most common arguments that people will use on the streets to say as to why we need nuclear weapons, and trying to go through these one by one and point out how there's no substance to any of them.
The first is that we have to be concerned about terrorists, but who would you fire Trident at if it's a terrorist attack, and how could you possibly deter a suicide bomber? And I think the other thing we have to realise is that having nuclear weapons creates a target for terrorists. Second argument that's been used is rogue states. Now, if we think back, the prototype example of a rogue state was Iraq in the roundabout 1990, when the Cold War had ended, and Iraq was the new justification for American and British nuclear weapons. But the key point in that is that when it actually came to the subsequent invasion of Iraq in 2003, there actually weren't any weapons of mass destruction. I mean, the chemical weapons that had been there had been destroyed. Iran, there's no real signs of a nuclear weapons program, and there's prospects of a deal at the moment. North Korea, for all that it does have a nuclear weapons program, is very much an impoverished nation, and I think that North Korea's behaviour is no basis for the rest of other countries around the world thinking they need nuclear weapons. The third one that's used quite a lot now is Russia, and people talk about, well, Ukraine once had nuclear weapons, but they don't have them any longer. But I think you have to recognise that the conflict in Ukraine would be far worse if there were still nuclear weapons there in areas that are disputed, where you've got militia running around and loose nuclear weapons. Would Russia really bomb London when many of the wealthiest Russians own parts of the city? 2 of the 7 wealthiest billionaires in Britain are from Russia. But I think we basically need to escape from mad mutual assured destruction. And President Kennedy told the United Nations in the 1960s, every man, woman and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles. We must abolish the weapons of war before they abolish us. In 1983, the world came very close to nuclear war when the early warning centre near Moscow falsely detected signs of an American attack, and the officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, has subsequently been described as a man who saved the world, because he didn't respond to he ignored those warnings and basically didn't respond the way they should have done. Fourth argument used is basically they call nuclear weapons a deterrent, and there's almost an assumption, but by using that word, then it gives them a justification. One of the strongest people that argue against this is General Lee Butler. Lee Butler was in charge of all American nuclear weapons in the early 1990s. He was actually responsible for the very large reduction in American nuclear weapons that happened after the Cold War. He describes himself, said, for many years he was among the most avid keepers of faith in nuclear weapons. But yet he subsequently argued against the whole idea of having nuclear weapons and that there were any value. He says that deterrence in the Cold War was fatally flawed, a dialogue of the blind with the deaf, and that the consequences of failure were intolerable. He describes using the word deterrence as like a cheap rhetorical parlour trick, a verbal sleight of hand. Deterrence gives easy semantic cover to nuclear weapons, making the horrors of employment with the siren veils of infallibility. He said of those who argue for nuclear weapons, they cling to deterrence, clutch its tattered promise to their breast, shake it wistfully at bygone adversaries, and balefully at new or imagined ones. The claim that nuclear weapons are deterrent is an assertion with no evidential basis. You could actually argue that having a scarecrow or having garlic in the bottom of outside your house, or any of these other things, are an effective deterrent. It's described as an independent deterrent, but Trident can be seen as the love child of Thatcher and Reagan. It's an American system, missiles that come from a common pool, the nuclear warheads of American parts, and America provides the launcher, fire control, navigation software. when Trident was ordered in 1982, the plan was to have only 12 months' supply of vital spare parts. The next argument is used is about status, and this is the real basis of Britain having nuclear weapons. Tony Blair described the 2007 decision to replace Trident, and he said, "I could see clearly the force of the common sense and practical argument against Trident, yet in the final analysis I thought giving it up too big a downgrading of our status as a nation." It's often argued that nuclear weapons give the UK a seat on the Security Council. However, a former British disarmament ambassador not only dismissed this, but he says it's a pernicious argument, because if you say we need nuclear weapons to have a seat in the Security Council, this is saying to other countries that they should acquire nuclear weapons and then they'll have this better status and can have a seat at the top table. Michael Portillo, former Conservative Defence Minister, has spoken out very strongly against Trident, and the way he describes it, when some generals said in a letter that we needed it, he responded saying, "You're probably familiar with these men who are worried about their virility and buy large sports cars, and I think this is a case in point. Our independent deterrent is not independent and doesn't constitute a deterrent against anybody that we regard as an enemy." Another point that's made is that Trident create jobs, but if we actually look at them, there's 520 jobs at Faslane and Coulport that the Ministry of Defence say civilian jobs that rely on Trident. And the reality is Trident destroys jobs, because far more would be created if the same money was spent on other projects. The standard lines use that deterrence is insurance in an uncertain world, but this is Jim Murphy and others. Independent deterrent provides us with the ultimate insurance policy. It increases our international influence. But it's a dodgy insurance policy. It doesn't provide any cover for the real risks. It's useless and very expensive. The Labour policy in the recent election was, as long as we live in an uncertain world, it's right that the UK retain its own deterrent. So basically, what that policy was saying is, so long as we are unable to predict the future, then we need to have nuclear weapons. So that's a summary of these various arguments, none of which really stand up. So the feeling is that it's now time to ban the bomb. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines, clusters of bombs, firebombing cities, these have all been banned. So why have nuclear weapons not been banned? In December last year, there was an international conference which Scottish CND and other Scottish representatives attended. Since then, there's been a pledge by the Austrian government to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons, and is now signed by 117 nations.